What would you do if a child came running to you in fear, begging for help? Now imagine that officer you turn to for protection isn't who you think they are. In this powerful story, a young girl runs to an officer in desperation, only to discover the shocking truth behind the man in uniform. This is a story of fear, trust, and betrayal. The afternoon sun casts long shadows across the quiet suburban street. A gentle breeze rustles the trees, carrying with it the distant hum of life continuing as normal. But for one little girl, this moment is anything but ordinary. Emma, just 5 years old, runs as fast as her small legs can carry her, her pink backpack bouncing against her back. Her curly hair bounces with each hurried step, but she doesn't stop. Her breathing is uneven, and fear grips her tiny frame as she searches desperately for safety. Ahead of her, standing tall in his neatly pressed uniform, is Officer Lucas. His navy blue uniform is immaculate, his badge gleaming in the sunlight. He has an air of authority, a presence that commands trust. People in this neighborhood know him. They greet him with nods of familiarity, believing that the man in uniform is a symbol of safety. And yet, as Emma reaches him, something shifts in the air, something unspoken but heavy. The officer's posture straightens as he sees the little girl running toward him. His calm expression doesn't falter, but his sharp eyes take in every detail. The worry in her eyes, the tight grip she has on her backpack straps, the way her small frame trembles. To him, this should be nothing more than a child seeking help, but there's something different about this moment, something unusual. Emma skids to a stop just a few feet away from him, her small hands shaking. Her wide eyes search his face, pleading, desperate. When she finally speaks, her voice is barely above a whisper, yet the weight of her words hangs heavy between them. "He's not my daddy," she says, her tiny voice cracking. Officer Lucas doesn't react immediately, but something flickers in his eyes. He kneels slightly to meet her gaze, his tone measured, careful. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Emma's breath hitches, and she glances behind her, terrified. Somewhere down the street, a black SUV sits idling at the curb. The man in the driver's seat is watching them. His knuckles grip the steering wheel tightly, his expression unreadable. To the average passerby, it looks like just another parked car. But to Emma, it's a cage waiting to trap her again. The officer follows her gaze, his face remaining unreadable. His radio crackles softly, the only sound between them. The tension tightens. This is the moment where everything should shift, where safety should envelop Emma like a warm blanket. But instead, something about the officer's stance, the subtle way his fingers twitch at his side, makes the air even heavier. Emma's grip tightens on her backpack, as if it's the only thing tethering her to safety. "I don't know him," she whispers again. "He said I have to go with him, but I don't wanna." For a split second, silence stretches between them. And then Officer Lucas does something that changes everything. Instead of reaching for his radio to call for backup, instead of shielding Emma behind him, his lips press into a firm line, and he lets out a slow, measured breath. His eyes dart back to the black SUV for just a moment, just long enough for Emma to notice, just long enough for the dread in her stomach to turn to something worse. His next words are quiet, deliberate. "Are you sure?" Emma's little head nods frantically, her curls bouncing. Her whole body is trembling now, tears forming in her eyes. She steps back slightly as the officer straightens to his full height. Then, something unexpected happens. The black SUV's engine revs, and the man inside steps out. A tall, imposing figure, dressed in dark clothing, his eyes locked onto the officer. There's no hesitation in his steps, no uncertainty. He walks toward them with the kind of confidence that only comes with knowing something others don't. Emma feels her stomach drop. The air is suffocating now, thick with an unspoken understanding that she's standing in the middle of something much bigger than herself. And then, Officer Lucas does the unthinkable. He doesn't step between her and the approaching man. He doesn't put a protective hand on her shoulder. Instead, he does something small, something almost imperceptible. He shifts his weight slightly, his posture changing. And suddenly, Emma knows. She knows she made a mistake. Because this man, this officer she ran to for help, was never going to save her. He was never going to stop the man in the black SUV. He was never on her side. And in that moment, the world feels so much bigger, so much darker, and so much scarier than it ever had before. Her pulse pounds in her ears as she pieces it together, as the dread seeps into her small frame. Lucas isn't looking at the SUV, but he knows it's there. And suddenly, she knows something else, something even worse than the feeling of being watched. Officer Lucas isn't just dismissing her. He knows exactly who was following her. And he isn't going to help her at all. The air is thick with tension as Emma grips Officer Lucas's sleeve, her small hands trembling. Her eyes, wide with fear, dart to the black SUV idling in the distance. The fear pressing down on her chest feels suffocating. She tries to form the words, but her throat is tight, her breath shaky. Finally, she manages to say it, 3 words that hold the weight of her desperation. Don't let him find me. Lucas's expression doesn't change. He looks down at her, his cold blue eyes flickering with something unreadable. The words hang in the air, but instead of alarm, instead of concern, there's only hesitation. Emma's pulse races. Why isn't he doing anything? Why isn't he asking who him is? She grips his sleeve tighter, her small voice barely above a whisper. Please. Lucas finally moves, but it's not the reaction she expected. He exhales, slowly, deliberately, before glancing up the street. The SUV hasn't moved, but Emma knows, deep in her bones, that whoever is inside is waiting. Lucas sighs. What's your name? His tone is flat, disinterested. Emma blinks. Emma, she stammers. Lucas nods, but there's no comfort in his expression, no urgency in his voice. And where's your mother, Emma? Emma's lip trembles. I don't know. I was walking home and he was there. Lucas tilts his head. And you're sure someone was following you? He kneels, finally leveling with her, but his eyes scan her face with something closer to skepticism than concern. Are you sure you didn't just imagine it? Emma swallows hard. Why is he asking her this? She wouldn't have run to him if she wasn't sure. She points down the street. He was. The late afternoon air is thick with the scent of damp pavement. The storm has passed, leaving behind puddles that reflect the towering brick buildings lining the street. Emma, her yellow shirt slightly damp from the lingering mist, clutches the straps of her pink backpack tightly. Her small legs move quickly, the rubber soles of her shoes slapping against the wet sidewalk as she looks over her shoulder for the 3rd time in 2 blocks. The feeling has been there for days, that gnawing sensation at the back of her mind, the creeping awareness that someone is watching her. But today, it isn't just a feeling. It's real. Behind her, a figure lingers, keeping just enough distance to remain unnoticed by anyone else. Emma's heartbeat quickens as she rounds the corner. She has walked this route dozens of times before, But today, every shadow seems darker, every sound sharper. She doesn't know where to go, who to trust. Then she sees him. Officer Lucas stands at the intersection, his uniform crisp, his badge catching the dull light of the street lamp above him. His expression is unreadable as he scans the quiet street, his posture rigid, authoritative. He has been a presence in the neighborhood for months now, an FBI agent stationed here for reasons Emma doesn't understand. She has seen him before, has heard the hushed conversations between adults about him. Something about him makes her uneasy, but he is wearing a uniform. And uniforms mean safety, don't they? Without another thought, Emma sprints toward him, her breath coming in quick, frightened gasps. Her small hand tugs at the fabric of his sleeve, desperate for attention. "Officer, please, he's following me," she says, her voice trembling. Lucas looks down at her, his face betraying no emotion. His cold, pale blue eyes flicker past her, scanning the street. His movements are slow, methodical, as if he is assessing the situation with calculated indifference. "Who's following you?" he asks, his voice even. Emma twists her head to look behind her, expecting to see the man lurking in the distance, but he's gone. The sidewalk is empty. The hairs on the back of her neck stand up. He was just there. She knows it. "I don't know," she whispers, her voice small now. "He was right there." Lucas exhales through his nose, a sound that could almost be amusement. And what did he look like? Emma shakes her head. I don't know. He was wearing a hood. I think he was watching me." Lucas kneels slightly, bringing himself to her level. His fingers tighten slightly on the edge of his belt, where his holster rests. He studies her, his face unreadable. "You think?" Emma hesitates. Something about the way he asks the question, the way he is looking at her, makes her skin prickle. "I know," she insists, but it comes out more like a question. Lucas watches her for a moment longer before straightening. "Did he try to grab you?" She shakes her head. "No, but did he say anything to you?" Again, she shakes her head. "No, but—" Lucas lets out a slow sigh, his expression hardening just a little. "You know, little girls shouldn't run up to officers and make accusations like that unless they're sure. You could get someone in a lot of trouble." Emma's stomach drops. I wasn't lying." Lucas tilts his head slightly. "You just said you didn't know what he looked like. Maybe you imagined it." Emma steps back, a creeping feeling settling deep in her chest. This isn't right. Lucas's hand rests on his belt as he glances around the street again. The ease in which he dismisses her, the way his voice remains unnervingly calm, sends a chill through her bones. "Maybe you should just go home," he says, his voice lower now. "I'm sure it was nothing." But Emma knows it wasn't nothing. The realization slams into her like a crashing wave. She's standing in front of a man in uniform, someone who is supposed to help. Someone who should be reassuring her, asking more questions, making sure she's safe. But instead, he is making her doubt herself. He isn't taking her seriously, or worse, he doesn't want to. Emma grips the straps of her backpack so tightly her knuckles turn white. The distant rumble of a car engine makes her flinch, and when she looks past Lucas, she sees it. A black SUV parked just down the block, idling, waiting. Right there. But the words die in her throat. The SUV is still there, the engine idling softly, but the figure she saw before is gone. Lucas follows her gaze, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I don't see anyone." Emma's stomach twists. She can feel him watching from somewhere. She knows it. Lucas sighs, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Look, kid, I get it. Sometimes people feel like they're being followed when really it's just their imagination. He gives her a hard look. Are you making this up? Tears burn in Emma's eyes. No, she cries, shaking her head violently. I swear, he was watching me. I saw him. Lucas exhales through his nose. The disbelief in his eyes is crushing. All right, he mutters, standing up straight. Wait here. He reaches for his radio, pressing the button with an exaggerated slowness. Dispatch, this is Agent Lucas. I have a juvenile claiming she was followed. No visual on a suspect at this time. Requesting... He pauses, then exhales. Requesting further instruction. Emma's tiny hands curl into fists at her sides. Requesting further instruction. He should be looking for the man. He should be helping her. The radio crackles, but before the voice on the other end can respond, a sudden movement catches Emma's eye. Her breath hitches. The back door of the SUV opens just slightly, just enough for her to see a figure shift in the darkness. Her entire body freezes. Lucas doesn't notice. He's too busy pretending this isn't real. Emma tugs at his sleeve again, her voice urgent. Please, she begs, please don't let him find me. Lucas sighs in frustration. Emma, there's no... But then something changes. The SUV suddenly pulls away from the curb, its tires screeching slightly against the pavement as it speeds off. Lucas's brows furrow, and for the first time, Emma sees something flicker across his face. Something close to realization. He follows the car's movement, his expression tightening. Emma grips his arm even tighter. I told you, she whispers. Lucas remains still for a moment, his fingers tightening around his radio. Then, in a voice more serious than before, he mutters, Dispatch, cancel last call. I need an immediate vehicle search. Suspect car just left my location. The radio crackles again. Copy that, Agent Lucas, sending units to your position. Emma lets out a shaky breath, but the fear hasn't left her body. Lucas finally looks at her, his expression unreadable. For the first time since she ran to him, he actually believes her. But something in his face tells her he isn't surprised. He knew. Or worse, he already had an idea of who it was. The weight of Emma's words lingers in the air as Officer Lucas lowers his radio, his jaw clenched. The SUV that had sped off moments ago vanishes into the distance, but something inside him tells him this isn't over. A flicker of uncertainty crosses his face. Was he wrong to doubt her? Within minutes, flashing blue and red lights flood the street. A black, unmarked SUV pulls up alongside the patrol cars, and out step 3 federal agents, their faces unreadable, but their movements swift and efficient. Special Agent Ramirez, a tall woman with sharp eyes, steps forward, scanning the scene. Agent Lucas, she greets, her tone professional. We got your call. You mentioned a juvenile witness and a possible suspect vehicle. Lucas nods, but his stance remains rigid. Yeah. The girl claims she was being followed. Black SUV sped off when I called it in. Agent Ramirez narrows her gaze and kneels beside Emma, offering a reassuring smile. Sweetheart, can you tell me exactly what happened? Her voice is soft, the kind that invites trust. Emma hesitates for a moment, glancing at Lucas, but his expression is unreadable. She grips the straps of her backpack and finally speaks. I was walking home from school, and I saw him. He was watching me. I've seen him before, but today he was following me. Ramirez nods, listening intently. Did you get a good look at him? Emma swallows hard. I think so, but he was inside the car. Another agent, a tall man named Carter, steps forward, glancing at Lucas before addressing Ramirez. We ran a quick check based on the description of the vehicle. A black SUV, tinted windows, no plates. He exhales. We pulled surveillance footage from a nearby traffic camera. The car belongs to a known sex offender with ties to child trafficking networks. The air shifts. Lucas stiffens. Ramirez's expression hardens as she looks at Emma again. You did the right thing coming to us, sweetheart. You were absolutely right to be scared. Emma's lip quivers, but she holds back her tears. For the first time, someone is actually listening to her. Lucas, standing a few feet away, watches the exchange, his expression unreadable. His grip tightens around his belt. A known sex offender, he mutters, almost to himself. Carter nods. We've had our eyes on him for months, but we never had enough evidence to make an arrest. He looks back at Emma, his face growing serious. Until now. Emma's breath hitches. He was going to take me, wasn't he? Ramirez places a hand on her shoulder. We're not going to let that happen. Lucas remains frozen in place. The earlier skepticism in his eyes has vanished, replaced with something else, guilt. The weight of his mistake is sinking in. He had doubted her. He had dismissed her fear. And now, the truth is staring him in the face. Carter continues, his voice tense. We need to move fast. If he was scouting the area, he might not be working alone. Ramirez turns back to Lucas, her tone clipped. Agent Lucas, we need access to all local surveillance feeds and an immediate bolo on that SUV. We also need to put this entire block on alert. If this guy has been watching her, she's not the only one at risk. Lucas nods stiffly, reaching for his radio. Dispatch. I need all units to be on the lookout for a black SUV. No plates, tinted windows, possible abduction attempt. Suspect is a known sex offender with ties to child trafficking. The urgency in his voice is different now. There's no more doubt, no more hesitation. As he speaks, Emma watches him carefully. She doesn't fully understand the shift, but she feels it. Lucas meets her gaze for a brief moment. There is something there, an unspoken acknowledgement. She had been right, and he had been wrong. The FBI agents work quickly, mobilizing teams to track the suspect. Emma, still clutching her backpack, watches as they move around her, making sure she's safe. For the first time since she ran to Lucas, she doesn't feel invisible. And for the first time in his career, Lucas is forced to confront the reality of his own bias. The flashing red and blue lights still illuminate the neighborhood as Emma sits on the edge of an ambulance, wrapped in a warm blanket. The adrenaline is finally wearing off and exhaustion is setting in. An FBI agent kneels beside her, handing her a cup of hot chocolate from a nearby thermos. You did something really brave today, Emma, she says softly, smiling in a way that makes the girl feel safe for the first time in hours. Emma grips the cup, her small hands still shaking. She glances toward the street where the black SUV has been surrounded by agents. The man who had been following her is now in handcuffs, his head down as he's led toward the back of a squad car. She swallows hard, knowing that had she not spoken up, things could have ended very differently. Then a voice calls out, familiar and filled with emotion. Emma! Her parents rush toward her, their faces stricken with fear and relief. Her mother, eyes glistening with tears, drops to her knees and wraps Emma in her arms, holding her tightly. My baby, oh my God, I was so scared, she whispers, kissing the top of her head. Her father places a protective hand on Emma's back, his voice trembling. We came as soon as we heard. You're okay. You're safe now. Emma nods against her mother's shoulder but doesn't say a word. She just clings to them, letting the warmth of their embrace chase away the lingering fear. Not far from them, Officer Lucas stands silently watching the scene unfold. The weight of his actions, or rather his inactions, settles heavily on his shoulders. He had dismissed her. He had doubted her. And if it weren't for the persistence of the FBI agents, he could have been responsible for letting a predator slip away. For the first time in his long career, Lucas isn't sure how to feel. He had always prided himself on being a man of the law, a protector. But tonight, a 5-year-old girl had been braver than him. She had faced danger head-on, despite being ignored and doubted. The realization is a bitter pill to swallow. As Emma's family exchanges words with the agents, Lucas hesitates, then steps forward. He clears his throat. "Emma," he says, his voice quieter than before. The little girl turns, her wide eyes locking onto his. Lucas kneels in front of her, taking off his hat and holding it against his chest. I need to say something," he begins, his words slow and measured. He glances at her parents, then back at her. "I didn't listen to you when I should have. I didn't believe you, and that was wrong. I let my own judgment get in the way of doing my job." Emma watches him carefully, her expression unreadable. "I was supposed to protect you," Lucas continues, his jaw tightening. "But tonight, you were the one who made sure justice was served. And for that, I owe you an apology." A silence falls between them. The FBI agents nearby exchange glances, recognizing the weight of the moment. Emma blinks up at him, her small fingers still clutching the cup of hot chocolate. Then, after a beat, she nods. "Okay," Lucas exhales, as if that single word lifts a burden he wasn't sure he could bear. He stands up, giving her a firm nod. "You're going to be okay, kid. And you were right to run when you did. Never stop trusting yourself." Emma doesn't say anything, but her tiny shoulders straighten just a bit, as if, for the first time, she fully understands the power of her own voice. As the officers wrap up their investigation, Emma's parents guide her toward their car, whispering reassurances as they buckle her in. She takes one last look at the scene, the flashing lights, the officers, the man being driven away in handcuffs. Then she looks at Lucas, who is still standing there, watching her go. For the first time that night, she offers him a small, hesitant smile. It's not forgiveness, but it's a start. As Emma's family drives away from the scene, the city lights flicker past her window, but she barely notices them. She leans against her mother's shoulder, finally allowing herself to breathe deeply. The warmth of her parents' embrace, the safety of the car, and the knowledge that the man who had been following her was now behind bars all settle into her mind. For the first time in hours, she feels truly safe. The night had started like any other, but it ended as a defining moment in her young life. She had been terrified, but she had spoken up. Despite the disbelief, despite the fear in her chest, she had done what she knew was right. And because of that, justice had been served. Meanwhile, back at the scene, Officer Lucas watches the taillights of Emma's family disappear down the street. He is still processing everything, the weight of his actions, the lessons learned in a single evening. He had always believed himself to be a man of law, someone who upheld justice. But tonight, he had been faced with an uncomfortable truth. His bias had nearly cost a child her safety. He looks down at his badge, once a symbol of pride, now a reminder of responsibility. He knows he has a long way to go, but for the first time, he is willing to acknowledge it. As he walks toward his patrol car, he silently promises himself that he will do better. At the FBI field office, agents are piecing together the case. The arrest of a known predator is no small event, and Emma's courage has played a vital role in bringing him to justice. One agent, flipping through the reports, shakes his head in admiration. A 5-year-old changed the course of this case, he mutters. His colleague nods. Bravery doesn't have an age limit. The next morning, the headlines begin to circulate. News stations report on the young girl who helped stop a dangerous criminal. The story spreads, reaching beyond the city, inspiring others. Conversations spark about the importance of listening, about the role of law enforcement in communities, and about how quick assumptions can lead to dangerous mistakes. But for Emma, it's not about news stories or recognition. She wakes up in her bed, safe and warm, the world outside moving on. She doesn't fully understand the magnitude of what she did. She only knows that she was afraid, and she spoke up. And in the end, that was enough. Her story serves as a powerful reminder that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about speaking up even when your voice shakes. It's about pushing through doubt and doing the right thing, no matter how small you are. Emma's 3 words, spoken in desperation, carried the weight of justice. Now, the question remains, how many voices go unheard because of prejudice? How many warnings are ignored because of bias? Emma's story challenges us to reflect on our own perceptions and our role in creating a world where no one is dismissed simply because of who they are. How do we ensure that every voice is heard, especially the voices of those who need help the most? How can we work toward a future where protection is not determined by race, gender, or background, but by the simple fact that every life deserves safety? If Emma's story inspired you, take a moment to reflect. Like, share, and comment below, because awareness is the first step toward change. Let's start a conversation about justice, courage, and the kind of world we want to create. Emma proved that even the smallest voice can make a difference. Now, it's up to us to listen,